Hello and welcome. Really quickly here, I just want to do some front end conversation, and then we'll do some introductions and get into our topic today. So, thank you and welcome to Stoneridge Confab. Like I said, my name is Scott Frappier. I will be your host along with some of my other team members, who I'm going to introduce you shortly here. Really kind of fun today. We're going to go through a little bit of content when it comes to really the export to data lake capabilities and really the transition around that that you may have heard on the Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain product line. So kind of with that, I want to just do a little bit of housekeeping at the very beginning here, and then we'll go through our introductions. Stoneridge Confab, if you haven't been a participant on this in the past, it's really all about you, the person that's actually watching this stream. More specifically, at Stoneridge Software, we are a Microsoft Dynamics partner that focuses on the full stack support for business applications, which means that we focus on Dynamics, Microsoft 365, and then even the Azure services as well to really address business needs for our prospects and customers. Confab here is all about just kind of demystifying really what we do as consultants and what we talk about in terms of learning and education and things that you should be thinking about in order to really help drive your business and a lot of the capabilities there. So it's going to be a really great day today because we're going to be covering a lot of detail. As you can see here, we've got quite a bit of experts, a lot of brain power on this particular stream. That's really going to be going into the Power BI and also into the data lake and some of the other technologies that are related to that, such as Synapse Link and also Fabric, to really understand a little bit more of what you should be thinking about, especially if you have finance and supply chain or you're looking at finance and supply chain as a solution. How do you do your reporting? How do you make an enterprise grade reporting architecture that really supports the business and the objectives that you're trying to tackle? So Carly already put a comment in there. Yep, we're looking forward to it. The Stoneridge swag is everywhere here. Justin also has his Microsoft Fabric fun here too, so it should be a lot of fun. Rob already commented, what's in this for me? Well, you know what, Rob? You're going to learn way more about architecture when it comes to F&O and when it comes to, obviously, reporting in BI. So I guess with that, let's go ahead and introduce everyone because they're just sitting here listening to me chat. Esteban, Justin, and Chris. I'll start with you, Esteban. Why don't you give an introduction for the group so everyone knows who you are and what we're going to be talking about today?
Sure. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having us on this week. We appreciate it. So I am the data practice director here at Stoneridge Software. And as you mentioned, we have most of our customers are Dynamics customers, and we support the analytic solutions for those customers, regardless of their Dynamics products. We do have some customers who are not on Dynamics that we also support. And, happy to have Justin and Christopher here today to talk through some of the topics that are interesting to our analytics customers in the F&O space today. So we've got some customers who, want to know how they work with data, and there have been some changes recently, and we want to just help, like you said, demystify what that process looks like. So me personally, I've worked for a few different Microsoft partners over the years, been working in data analytics for over 15 years now, so I'm dating myself a little bit here, but my focus is really trying to help customers understand all the different analytic solutions to them, help them build the right size platform for them based on their use cases, and just help them make data fun and easy. So with that, we can go ahead and head over to Dr. Christopher Schleeper here and learn a little bit more about him.
Doctor.
Hey everybody, my name is Christopher Schleeper. I'm the BI and Analytics lead here at Stoneridge. Cumulatively, I've got about over 20 years experience in the IT industry, and much of that in the data analytics space. I worked for Microsoft for about 10 years total, and then just a couple other ones. I've been at Stoneridge here just about a year. Actually about 3 days away from being a year here at Stoneridge. So it's been a lot of fun. I like to specialize in getting into the data with the customers, both on the modeling side and the Power BI side. I also do some of the trainings that I also deliver some of the trainings that we have on the Power BI side to customers. So excited to get into this topic here. So Justin.
Hello, my name is Justin Dane. I'm down in Florida. I've been working at Stoneridge about 5.5 years. I've been an F&O developer since the year 2012. I started with version 4.0 worked on 2009, worked on 2012, F&O. I've been doing data and analytics for about a year and a half now. It's been an interesting transition.
Right? That's awesome. It's a lot of fun though, isn't it, Justin, to start getting
Yes,
into the
it is.
details, right? So, yeah, 4.0, yeah, you're dating yourself there with that one. That would be like the variant structure. Remember, those were the big news items that they talked about back in the day with the AX product. So, yeah, as you can see, everyone on stream here, we've got a really good team here that really wants to convey some specific information today, and then talk a little bit more generally too, obviously, in terms of the architecture, for example, between Fabric and Synapse Link, and really just kind of discuss that. And like Esteban said, obviously the export to data lake functionality is very specific to F&O. But I do want to caveat that there are going to be some learnings on this stream that you could probably use in general with any type of business system. So note that obviously we're focusing more on F&O, on what customers should be thinking about when making that transition, because I don't want to steal the thunder from the group here, but I think Microsoft has put a notice out there, right, that says customers need to start transitioning to the new either Fabric or Synapse Link as part of that process. Is that a correct assumption, team?
Yep,
Yes,
you're
that is.
correct, Scott. It's a very timely conversation for us. Our team is here working closely with Microsoft. We attend weekly meetings with them, understanding what their timeline is and how they're going to continue to support customers and when that support drops off. And I believe we've got some slides here, and we'll talk through what that looks like for customers. But yeah, if you're a customer today using export to data lake, the decision needs to be made as far as what are you going to do going forward, and we'll go through some of those considerations, but each customer is different. They've got their own unique sets of challenges, and so while we'll share some thoughts at a high level, ultimately we need to work with you and what you're trying to do to make the right recommendation for you.
Yeah, that's a great point out. And just to kind of double down on that, like you said, every architecture ever done, like I've done some BI in the past when it comes to like Hyperion, business objects back in the day that I went through and implemented at another company as well. And to your point, like we've got common tools that we use, but architecturally, obviously, every environment might be a little bit different. So obviously, we're going to be able to scale to that too, which is really cool. So I guess with that, instead of me taking more thunder here, Justin, I know you had some slides like Esteban had set up. Let me go ahead, and if you want to go ahead and broadcast or share your screen, Justin, I'll go ahead and flip over, and maybe we can start talking about like what this notice is, right? Because I think at the highest level, what we're hearing now is that customers need to transition off of the export to data lake capability, right? And maybe, Justin, you can explain a little bit of what that export to data lake is for people that may not know the concept here, and then what Microsoft is kind of pushing towards as part of that. So I guess with that, I've got your content. Let me get it clicked inside of here on the screen. Go ahead and take it away, sir.
Sure. I'll start with a brief definition of the export to data lake. The export to data lake is a service that Microsoft had to get data out of F&O, and it was exclusive to F&O. We've noticed that Microsoft is working on unifying all of their products. So decommissioning the export to data lake, which was a service that was exclusive to F&O, and working on a more unified solution is the path that they're on. And Synapse Link and Fabric, which are our two options to transition from export to data lake, are right in their vision, right? It's a unified platform that's going to give us data not only from F&O, but from other applications such as CE. And then we can use that data from both applications to combine in our reporting.
That's awesome, Justin. Just to kind of give maybe some more context too. So I think in Confab we've talked about like lifecycle services eventually is going to be deprecated and removed longer term on the finance and supply chain stack. We as a partner organization have known about this for years now, might be the right way to say it. It's a very slow process because what they're doing is they're really doing that one platform, like the one database. You've probably heard that in the past with Confab. So Justin, kind of to your point, the export to data lake capability was actually like an LCS solution that you installed. But if we're going to be in the Power Platform Administration Center, kind of to your point, unification to use the Dataverse type concepts makes a lot of sense, especially for that unification of data. So it's definitely needed, and it's longer term going to be beneficial, because then hopefully we'll get to one environment to be able to manage that right as we go through some of these concepts. So that's a good point out, Justin, as you go through it.
Right. And you brought up an important concept. I think we need to talk about what the Dataverse is, maybe for anyone that doesn't know, right? And we can think of the Dataverse as a database in the cloud that's going to have data from finance and operations and data from any other like ERP type data that we might have, like CE or sales. And it'll be in one place for us to access and do our reporting off of.
Yep.
Whereas if we flip this back to export to data lake, it was exclusive to F&O. So if we had other data that we wanted to get and combine with our reporting data from F&O, we had the limitation there around the export to data lake.
That makes sense. So I guess, Chris, excuse me, Justin, what else? Like, so we've got the timeline that has to happen here. Kind of what's our next steps here? Do you have like something to kind of describe at a high level of like, what is the path that we're supposed to be looking at or recommending to customers that they should be considering to figure out, what to move to? Because I know Microsoft has a recommendation in statements, even on the Learn documentation, that states, to go potentially to two different paths, I think is what I've heard. But maybe you can kind of explain that to the audience. And I know you have some slides to show that as well, Justin.
Sure. Before I jump into that, let me talk about the transition a little bit. Microsoft has thrown some dates out at us, and one big question is, we've seen this November 1st date, but what actually happens to the export to data lake service on November 1st? Well, it'll still be working. We can still do any closing, any reporting that uses data from F&O in our export to data lake service, and we'll have access to that, and we can use it through Q1 of 2025. But we should be looking at transitioning to Synapse Link or Fabric Link.
And Justin, do we have an idea for customers, making that transition? How much lead time do they have before it's, that decommissioning actually kicks in Q1? Are we thinking this is something that's, a weeks long kind of project, days long?
We don't know when in Q1 it's going to be decommissioned, and we should definitely take the opportunity to at least be testing one of these new services, because we have time to do that now, right? We can run Synapse Link or we can run Fabric in parallel with export to data lake. So if we wanted to run some year-end closing reporting in both solutions, we have that time frame now versus waiting to the last minute in Q1 when they start decommissioning this service and then scrambling, right?
Oh, that's great, Justin. Yeah, obviously every customer has their own kind of change management processes in place as it is. So running these services in parallel is a great strategy. And then, of course, whatever their normal processes are as far as deploying between environments is good to note as well, because we're only a week out from September here. So
right, it's
especially at the
quick.
end, and end of the year and holidays, there's not a lot of production pushes, things that go on this time of year. So I think for most customers, on that export to data lake, making that decision as quickly as possible at this point is going to be in their best interest.
Yeah, I agree. And Microsoft has started ramping up their notifications that this service is decommissioned and that you need to make the transition to Synapse Link or Fabric Link. As of this week, they've actually started putting banners in LCS and in F&O. So when you go to that export to data lake screen in F&O, you will see a banner. And I took a screenshot of it. That will tell you the service is being deprecated. And it provides their Microsoft Learn documentation about the transition and what you can expect.
And Scott, we've been working with customers who are kind of proactively reaching out to us about this, since this has kind of been communicated over the past few months as already. But we're also reaching out to our existing customers. We've got plans to just to remind them in case they aren't seeing these, or in case the right people aren't seeing these messages.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess, one of the things I would think the audience would be asking, especially if they're already on the export to data lake, would be why so fast, right? And maybe Justin, we can talk in this as well a little bit of, the complexity or maybe technically the lack of complexity, right, that is needed to potentially transition a true export to data lake, one for one, meaning like not a customized environment per se, but someone that's used the export to data lake and then repointing to now some of the other technologies. It's not as hard, right? But I don't want to
Right.
lead the witness per se saying that it's going to be easy, because there's going to be challenges in some organizations depending upon what their architecture is that drives that. Is that kind of why you think Microsoft is trying to move so fast with this, is because it isn't as big of a push as compared to maybe a whole architectural change in it? Is that kind of where Microsoft might be at with it, Justin?
Yeah, that's a fair statement. If we look at Synapse Link and Fabric Link compared to export to data lake, we can keep our data shapes the same, right? So it's not as heavy lift as it sounds.
Yep. Okay. And maybe we'll let the audience kind of take a look at it as you get a little bit deeper here, because like I said, I know Esteban's like, Scott, no, 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 type of a thing. It's like, well, there's going to be some situations, right? You always have to remember the moment that you start customizing something, you should be taking a little bit more time to make sure you're doing your due diligence on what those customizations are and how they're going to transition. And just as an example as well, yeah, Rob, you'd asked deprecated equals no longer supported or no longer working or unalived. That sounds like what is that? Number five is alive, is what I'm thinking when you say that, short circuit. So, yeah, deprecated just typically means that at a specific time, it's going to be removed from functionality from being used. And usually in our line of business, we'll have a deprecation notice that occurs typically at a wave release level. So they'll say like at wave 1 of 2023 that they're going to deprecate functionality for 2024 wave 1. And what that means is that it'll be no longer supported, and then longer term that could mean that it is removed as well. So an example of another deprecated feature in finance is going to be the payroll functionality as an example, right? That has been deprecated moving forward. So that's a good question, Rob, because we use those terms, but what it really means is that it's kind of a blend, meaning typically deprecation means you need to start moving off of it because it's not supported. In other situations, deprecation can actually mean that they're removing it. But as Justin kind of identified, it looks like Q1 is where they're going to start that full removal process, because we've had the deprecation announcement here now for, since wave 1, right? At least I think they maybe even before that. Is that right? Do you guys know?
Yeah, that's right. I want to say maybe even the beginning of last year,
Okay.
they were talking to us about export to data lake being deprecated.
Okay, that makes sense. So, anyways, appreciate that, Rob. Go ahead, Justin. I'm sorry, stealing your thunder here a little bit. So continue.
That's okay. So I talked about there's two transition paths available for us when we're transitioning off of export to data lake, and that's Synapse Link, and that is Link to Fabric. Synapse Link allows us to keep a lot of our data shapes the same. And if we're looking for a quick transition just to move off export to data lake and leave our data shapes the same, Synapse is the recommended path to go for Microsoft. If we're looking for additional functionality, maybe some of the no ETL functionality that Fabric offers, then Fabric Link would be the way to go.
Interesting.
There,
Yes.
go ahead.
Go ahead, Esteban.
I was going to say, Scott, you mentioned something right before you were talking about that question in chat about, this actually is an opportunity for a lot of customers to really take a step back and kind of reevaluate their solution. I'm not sure the whole decision-making process that went in for most customers who were, using the export to data lake, or customers who are just getting started with analytics with their Dynamics platforms. But we have two viable options right now that both have different pros and cons to them. So I think not rushing into a decision is important. And right now, having these two options, we can go through with customers and understand where they're trying to get to with their future state of analytics, and explain to them why one option might be better for them over the other. And so that's why we don't want to go into any conversation automatically recommending something. We want to go in, understand what customers are trying to do, and then based off of our expertise from our implementations, working with customers who are doing similar things, we can bring our experience in and tell them what we've found works for them. And of course, we've got our own customer references as well. So if there's ever that kind of concern, we can say, hey, this is a customer who's done this, and this is what seems to have worked out well for them.
That's awesome.
Agreed. To keep this moving forward, I'm going to talk about Synapse Link first, and then I'll turn everything over to Chris, and he'll be talking about Link to Fabric for us.
Awesome.
So what we see on the screen today is a before and after architecture pattern, and the before is using export to data lake, and the after is using Synapse Link. As we see, the services have been unified, and if we're looking at the after architecture that shows Synapse Link, it shows us our F&O data, and it shows us our CE data in one spot, which will be in the Dataverse. There is a connector that we install through LCS for our F&O environment that allows us to get our F&O data into our Dataverse.
That's awesome. So architecturally here, you can see, like you saw the top one and the bottom one, like that middle layer, basically the Synapse Link is what's doing all that management now, as opposed to the export to data lake. And BYOD, that's been, I mean, it's interesting it's still even on there, right? Because that's been deprecated for a very long time. But I'm sure there's some enterprise customers that have their own, SSAS instances that they probably still use. I guess, there's some, Justin, I know architecturally it's simplifying it, but there's also some benefits, like even in like the data format, right, that the file is being exported as, because we talked about, I think even in prior confabs when we talked about the export to data lake, I was just super disappointed that they use CSV. I know why they did that, but now I think we're getting into like Parquet formats, which could theoretically even help customers, right, in terms of if you have a CSV file, not to get too techy with this, but you can actually have a lot more reads that go against that storage account, right? Because it doesn't have what we call columnar indexes that are actually embedded in the Parquet or in the CSV file per se, whereas Parquet has those types of capabilities, right? So I don't know, Justin, there's going to be more than just, like you said, the ability to just use Synapse Link. You're going to get some benefits as well then of using a more modern file format that could help as well. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, that is a correct assumption. The default format for Synapse Link and for Fabric Link is Delta Parquet. And some of the benefits to Delta Parquet is query times are faster, and it just scales better than CSV to larger data formats.
Yep.
And if we think about some of our tables in F&O, it's perfectly acceptable for our general ledger to have 200 million plus records, right? And the Delta Parquet format can just handle that better. And it also supports compression, which CSV didn't support. So the files that we're moving over are going to be smaller. And if we think about Synapse Link, where we're charged because of the amount of data we move, any compression that we can get to make those file sizes smaller is going to be a cost savings right away. And another benefit to Synapse Link is it's a managed service, meaning we don't have that CDM util no more that we had with export to data lake. So there was this manual application that we had, the CDM util, and it took our data lake metadata and converted it into our Synapse data for us. And now Microsoft handles that for us, right? They handle merging the changes of the tables as well. So before we would get our CSV files into our Synapse workspace, and we would have to worry about merging those changes. And Microsoft handles that for us now.
That's awesome.
So it's a lot easier.
Hey Scott, I'm very impressed with your data knowledge. Is coming from your background, or are you doing a little reading up on this before our meeting today?
No, not. This is just my background. Pre-sales, I get to play with everything, and when I went through, like I said, the export to data lake, I back in the day, of course, I researched then what are the file formats that are supported, right? So it's just one of those where I guess Esteban, it's good to generally know a lot of different things from a high level in pre-sales, but I'm like you guys, as you dig into it, you're going to have so much more depth, which is great to have on the stream here. So yeah, it's good to see that we're going in a direction that when I initially saw it a couple years ago, I was like, yeah, it'd be nice to have that capability. Maybe in the future we'll have it, right? But it looks like they're finally getting to it, which is awesome.
Yeah,
Sure.
these are some exciting features. I wish they were around back in my development days.
Right. Agreed.
You can really tell that Microsoft is listening to the feedback they receive from their clients.
Yep.
Synapse Link and Fabric Link show that. Before I transition over to Chris to talk about Fabric Link, I wanted to show you guys the Makers portal, which is the biggest change between export to data lake and Synapse Link from a cosmetic standpoint. This is the Makers portal in Power Apps, and this is my Synapse Link, and these are all the tables that I have enabled for export over to my Synapse workspace. One thing I want to point out is the sync status. If there is an error, it shows us, and it shows us an active status if everything is good with that table, and it shows the last change that was pushed over to our Synapse workspace. It would also show us a count of records that it's exporting, but this is hooked up to our dev environment, and we don't have data in that environment currently. So that's why all our record counts are 0. So,
but it makes sense, right? In
yeah.
terms of the Synapse Link is in the portal. You go to the Synapse Link and you can see the entity source of FinOp tables, right? So, like these are what's cool about this is that I look at this when I go to the OData endpoints all the time, right, as we go through some of our demos. So it's really looking at, I think, Justin, here, is it the tables it's looking at, or is it actually looking at entities, or a combination of both?
It is looking at tables right here. We have the capability to export entities, or at least the shape of the entity, right?
Yep.
So we don't actually export the views because the views could, be using XSS logic or some inheritance logic that we can't easily export over.
Okay.
But Microsoft has given us a utility that allows us to create a view in our Synapse workspace in the shape of that data entity.
Okay, that's awesome. Okay.
Sure. So on this screen, be sure I select F&O. It shows us that we have 116 tables exporting out of 2,512. And if anybody knows F&O, there's a lot more tables than 2,512, right? Microsoft has come up with a list of the most popular tables giving feedback from clients using export to data lake and these other services. We have the capability to add additional tables if they don't show up in this list. So one question that we get a lot is, what about custom tables?
Right.
We can edit the properties on that table and get it to show up in this list. So we don't have to worry about base tables that are not showing up or custom tables that are not showing up, because we can edit the properties and get them to show up in this list. Just like export to data lake, when we first activate a table in Synapse Link or Fabric, it does a full push of that table, and then it syncs the changes.
Awesome. And then Justin, is there anything that has to be enabled in F&O for that? Is there any like change tracking? I think from a license configuration perspective, are there any settings that you have to change in order to then use Synapse Link after you've kind of gone through the base setup or linking of the environment to Dataverse?
There is a license config change that we have to make, and it's a SQL row change is the name of the config item,
Yep,
but I forget the exact PU number, but Microsoft does that by default now.
they do. Okay, awesome. So
They do.
awesome. Okay.
And as we create new development for tables and data entities, the property change that we have to make on those tables is enabled by default. Anything out of the box or anything custom that we've had before these updates were defaulted, we'll have to go in and change manually. But it's very minor change that we have to make.
Okay. That's pretty awesome. What else do you have here, Justin? I mean, I could ask a trillion questions. I want to make sure I leave time for Chris too, because I see like you
Yeah.
have partitions, right, that are inside of here for performance scenarios, I'm assuming, for data. Like partitioning is a tactic, right, used to make it so that you can quickly segregate data, and partition by year would be segregating it by year, right, in terms of where it's uploading. I mean, it looks like you said, it supports Delta, so that would be full push with net change then as transactions are going through. I'm assuming,
Yeah.
Justin, you could blow it away and restart it, right, by deactivating and reactivating, but you're probably gonna have to wait a little bit, I'm assuming, for it to run through the process to copy that data to the storage account. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, that is a correct assumption. Uh, Depending on the resources per our environment, depending on what activities are going on in that environment, such as maybe users conducting transactions, and depending on the indexes that are on that table by default, we might have to wait, right? So in addition to those things, we also might have to wait a while depending on the amount of records in that table.
Okay, that makes
You know,
sense.
but I was going to talk about one thing that we see on this error is it says that we need some additional indexes. And Microsoft actually handles that in the services behind the scenes for us now. With export to data lake, we used to get errors if there wasn't a rec ID index on the table. And those were things that we needed a developer for to create an extension if it was a base table. And Microsoft builds those indexes for us behind the scenes. So that is another layer that could impact how long it takes for a table to activate.
That makes sense.
So versus going in right now and activating one, I'm just going to take one of these that's already active, like our custom moisture, custom voice trans. And if we switch over to our Synapse workspace and look at our tables, we can see that they're being replicated over here. One thing that is noticeably different is we have like custom voice trans, custom moisture, but then we have an underscore partition version of the table, and that is a snapshot. And the fields that you are referring to back in the Maker portal for partition impact those snapshots.
I see. Okay, cool.
So as far as any data shapes that we have or any views that we've created on top of the tables and export to data lake, we can bring those views into our new Synapse workspace and use them without having to change them.
So that can be pretty easy then, right? Because like you said, you could even have this in parallel, right? Where kind of to your point, you could have export to data lake still running and then do the Synapse link and have a different storage account and start doing that transition and validation concurrently, right, as you go through that. Is that a correct assumption as well, Justin?
Yeah, that is a correct assumption.
Okay. So this actually, like I said, I guess at a high level, a lot of the architecture from a Synapse Link perspective, storage accounts, Spark pools that we use for it, like we used even with export to data lake, those are basically about the same. Is that correct as well, Justin?
Yeah, that
O-
is correct.
Okay, okay,
With Synapse Link, we need the same object. We bring our own storage account. If we're going to do any ETL with the data coming out of F&O or CE, we need a Synapse workspace so we can write our T-SQL views and, maneuver that data in a format that's acceptable for our Power BI reports.
okay. That makes sense. And so the benefit could be kind of to your point, like because there are views. I remember with export to data lake, I don't I actually did it manually. I think the CDM util came out even a little bit after the initial version of the data lake where I had to manually create a view to then link to that data source in the storage account after I added it to Synapse Link. It sounds like number one, that's way easier now because is it doing this setup or do you have to create that link to the storage account to reference the table? I guess what I'm getting at, Justin, is if I have a table like cust table that I've created a report off of in Power BI and I'm using the export to data lake, I have a table I'm accessing. I would just like to change the underpinning or data source backend from the export to data lake to the Synapse Link integration. Is that possible then? Do you go into here and do that in Synapse Link to repoint it, or does it take care of that automatically in the background?
So for our Power BI report, we would have to point to the new endpoint for our Synapse workspace.
Okay.
But besides that, we as long as we have the same data sources enabled, that would pretty much be it for our Power BI report.
Awesome. Okay. So there's going to be some caveats, right? Obviously, as
Sure.
we go through it
Yeah,
once again,
of
right?
course.
But just they've tried to make it as easy as possible then for that transition. It sounds like, and so we can work through and identify obviously tables that may have more complexity with them because maybe they've done some more complex ETLs that aren't exactly the same per se, because I do think there are some Learn documents that maybe I'll find in the background and post it in chat where they talk about kind of the differences between export to data lake and then Synapse Link. Is that I thought I saw that. Have you read that before as well, Justin, by chance or not?
Yeah, I've read that. Some of the behavior of different data types is a big difference between Synapse Link and export to data lake. But Microsoft is constantly working on, some of the common features in F&O that don't transition well over to the Dataverse with export to data lake, Synapse Link, or with Fabric, right? There's these concepts of table inheritance, and that stuff just has never transitioned good, or array fields. So they're constantly trying to support these new caveats for us that are not available out of the box today for export to data lake.
Okay, well that's awesome. Like I said, this is going to be where they're improving, really that export capability. I guess Justin, just to make sure Chris has enough time too, is there anything else that you want to tell the audience regarding this? And I've got a big question just after that then too. But anything else that you want to share with the audience?
No, I don't think so. I'll turn it over to Chris.
Awesome. I guess, and while Chris, I'm going to go ahead and just get our speaker up right here, and maybe Justin and Esteban, as Chris is getting his feed broadcasted. I'm just really curious, like, so, we hear both of these technologies, and I know we said it's simply, right? It's like if you go to Synapse Link, that's an easier path technically. And I guess, maybe for the group, I guess I'm coming to like we saw that one slide that Justin had that said Fabric had no ETL and some of these other concepts that are introduced with it. Um, I guess maybe I'll start this way and then you guys can tell me if I'm crazy or not. Start with so Synapse Link, it's really a modular architecture, right? That Fabric Link kind of replicates, but Fabric Link, for example, is actually more of a managed service, right? So the example I love to give with that is like if we use Power Apps versus Logic Apps as an example. Logic Apps is a much more modular component in the Azure framework that supports a lot of different Azure components with it. But if you think about it from an end user perspective, those components are not as relevant to, for example, Power Apps because they want a more simplified or a more platform centric experience, I guess is what I'm getting at with that. Is that kind of what Synapse Link is versus Fabric? Is it where Synapse, you've got more ability to customize individual components with that data flow and architecture? Or is that not the case, I guess? Because I think technically, I think some of the audience wants to know, like, why would I look at one versus the other from a technical architectural perspective?
Yeah, Scott, I would probably argue that for most customers, especially if there are no customizations or very minimal, that Fabric would probably be an easier setup for them because of that no ETL component for them. They would have the data automatically available to them to start reporting. But like I said, there are uh, a lot of different things that we consider when we make that criteria for why to go one route versus the other. Even from a cost perspective, on its face you would think Fabric would be more expensive, but again, depending on what you're doing, how much data you have, how often you're refreshing and things like that, Synapse Link can be just if not more expensive as a solution. So there are a lot of different things to consider, but as far as ease goes, I would probably say, depending on what the customer is trying to do, Fabric just out of the box, nothing extra would probably be a faster setup for them.
Okay, that makes sense. And even the simplification of the billing, right, Esteban, from it might be a big benefit as well. But to your point, you should be having a discussion around it, not just making an automatic. It's not just go to Synapse Link. It is have a discussion to qualify really the business need to make sure you're aligned then for the technology. Because I think, Chris, you had even mentioned in a conversation we had before this that some customers may start with Synapse Link and then go to Fabric, or even go from Fabric to Synapse. Right? You can go kind of different directions too, or even I think we were actually talking about in the context of the licensing with it as well, right? Where you could try Fabric and have the monthly fee, but then have a 40% reduction in cost potentially for it. So can kind of your point, Esteban, be fairly competitive, right, as part of that. So maybe, Chris, what I can do is let's have you start talking then to Fabric a little bit. Maybe you can intermingle like maybe some of the advantages that you see then with Fabric versus that of Synapse Link, and maybe even some of the weaknesses, right? Because I think for the audience, the reality is really what they're going to need to be able to make that decision, right?
Absolutely. So on the Fabric side, what I like to tell people to think about when you're thinking about Fabric, it is that conglomeration of all those different pieces that we have, right? So Fabric, when you're setting up Fabric, you have Fabric. When you're setting up Synapse Link, you have to individually set up a storage account, and you have to set up the Synapse. You have to turn on your your Spark pool within Synapse, and so there's a lot of individual things that you kind of have to set up and move things over. Whereas Fabric has all of that integrated into one. Fabric is your Azure Data Factory for moving your data with your pipelines. It is also it's your storage account with the One Lake. So with that, when you get Fabric, when you have Fabric and when you start a workspace with Fabric, you get what's called the Microsoft One Lake. And what I tell people is when you're looking at the One Lake, think of One Lake as your OneDrive for data. Right, it's the one place where you go, and can hold all data. And it's not just F&O data or the Dataverse data. With it's Fabric, so you can bring in data. There are shortcuts and stuff where we can bring in data from different from other resources, from our on-prem resources. So Fabric has that. And when you set up that workspace, you get that One Lake that goes with Fabric, which is particularly useful when if you're going to bring in additional data other than just your F&O data or your data from your Dataverse. into there. And so then it also, I mean, you also have other capacities, like there's some real-time data with like KQL that you can use. There's also, if you have any data scientists on staff, there's also a number of like machine learning things that you can jobs and stuff that you can run in there. And all those are going to play into what type of capacity and size of storage that you need on the Fabric side. So if if you are a smaller shop and don't want to necessarily have to deal with all that individual setup of all the individual components, then Fabric is a great alternative because it has everything set up in there for you. Like you turn on the capacity and you have a storage account. You have your pipelines that you can then set up and everything, and it's all right there in that in that environment. But as it sits, there are a number of different benefits that it has, and a lot of them on the page, but the ones that I'll highlight were kind of what I've already talked about, is that we have everything all kind of in one place, and it behaves very similar to and looks similar to the Azure Synapse side. So we still go through the make portal, so the make.powerapps.com portal. What's different about it is that when you see this Microsoft OneLake, that is our Fabric link. So we know that's our Fabric link one, because that one says Microsoft OneLake. And as I told you before, when you set that connection up, and when you set up a workspace in Synapse or in Fabric, you have a Microsoft OneLake associated with it. So that's where it is. And from there, we can do the same thing as Justin showed. We can go in there and we can see, all the tables that are associated with it. We can see the count, the entity source, where it's coming from. In this instance, I have tables coming in from the Dataverse and from F&O, and it'll give us our Fabric. The column on the end here is our Fabric status of where it's created or not. And we get the same thing that Justin was showing. It tells us whether they're active or not. You also have this one, I've only had to use it once or twice, but there is this refresh Fabric tables. If you get to a point where just a number of the tables are out of sync status or anything, we can do this refresh Fabric tables, and it refreshes all of them, meaning it resets up that connection out to our from the Dataverse out to our Fabric instance. So that'll go through there, and then after that, you'd have all of your tables would show as active there. One thing I do want to highlight and get to is that one of the big differences between doing Fabric Link or doing the Synapse Link is that if you'll notice here, when you're looking at where it says on the Dataverse, when you're trying to manage those tables, the Dataverse says 638 out of 649. I can't turn those tables off. So when we do the Fabric Link, all those Dataverse tables are coming over no matter what. So whether you CE a ton or not, when you do that Fabric Link, you're getting those tables. You're getting all those tables no matter what. Those will be in Fabric as well. You can still choose the F&O tables that you want, individually, the F&O tables. So obviously your larger tables like your general ledger or your custom invoice trans, all the same thing that Justin was showing, we can still do with our F&O, individually pick our F&O, but all of your Dataverse tables are coming over no matter what. So that's the huge difference there, is that when we're looking at the Synapse Link, you can choose whether to bring Dataverse tables over into your storage account or not. But with Fabric, those are coming over no matter what.
Yeah, and maybe Chris, to ask a quick question with that. I mean,
Yeah.
does that, so with Fabric, because you're paying for, we had talked about like DTUs is a metric for transactions, right? That you bill off of, or Microsoft has billed with other platforms as well. Do you pay for storage with this then, Chris, for Fabric, or is it that fee that you pay? So does it? I guess the question is, does it really matter if it comes over?
Not really, and it depends on whether you're using the tables or not. So if I go back over here, we don't have our CE, the Dataverse environment, set up with us. So if I'm scrolling through here, you'll notice I have ones and twos. There's a couple a little bigger ones, but for the majority of the tables, the majority of the 400 tables, there's zeros, ones, twos, fives, tens. So yes, technically you do pay for storage, and I think it's about 2.3 cents per gigabit per month on the Fabric side. So for a terabit, you'd be paying like $26 a month for that storage, per terabit on the Fabric side. So no, it shouldn't be a big deal. And then if you are somebody who are, if you do use CE and are using a lot of those Dataverse tables, well, then you've got it there, and now you can use that data and information in your reporting as well too. So I don't think it shouldn't be a huge hindrance or anything on there, because it's not, most of the tables are not very, very large or have a whole lot of data in them, unless you're actually using them, in which case you'd want them to be able to do your reporting off of.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess the big thing here would just be to kind of think through the one lake. Really, the way that they've done that is with Dataverse, at least, is it's a reflection of that database into that one lake, right? Because it's going to have all those components that are inside of it. So that makes sense. Okay, well, awesome.
And I'll actually take you out and show you. So from here, you can actually click on the view. After you've selected the tables you want, you can view them in Microsoft Fabric. So if we actually go out to Fabric, so here's what your Fabric looks like. For those of you who played a lot in Power BI, the Power BI service, you'll notice that it looks exactly like that. It's just that I know it's Fabric versus just a Power BI service. And you can see here. So this is this is the connection that I have back to my Dataverse data, and it automatically creates a default semantic model and a SQL Analytics endpoint layer for us. But before I show you those real quick, I do want to point out, so one of the benefits about, now that I'm in Fabric, about having this data in Fabric, is that in the lower left-hand corner here, I have this little data factory icon. This is one of the things that makes Fabric really nice, is that instead of having to go out on the Synapse side, if I want to go to the storage account, I got to go out to Azure and I got to go to my storage account. If I want to go to Synapse, I got to go to Azure, go to my Synapse. Down here, if I want those different experiences, if I want the data factory, like the movement of my data, I can choose the data factory experience. And then I can, it puts data pipeline, data flow gen 2. It gives me those kind of more data factory experience items to very quickly and easily create those on here. If I want to switch to my data activator or data engineering side, I can easily click to that, and it gives me, and I'm still in Fabric, and it says, hey, these are the things that are most often associated with data engineering, so I can easily create those and jump into and use them with my data. If I want to do a pipeline to bring in additional data, if I want to create a notebook because I'm more, I feel I'm better at PySpark and want to be able to do my ETL process there. So you can easily create a notebook. So you can easily, jump back and forth between the different experiences and get to it. So then I'm just going to go back out here to my workspace that has my Dataverse in here. And if I click on the Dataverse here, you'll see that it brings me into, and here is all, I'm in the Lakehouse right now, and so you can see here's all the Dataverse tables and my F&O tables in here, and this is, so here's my sales table. That's the one I have highlighted, so you can see that's the F&O one. Then these are all my other tables out there as well. But for those of you who so this would be more akin to if you wanted to then create a notebook and work, do the ETL, whatever transformation, or bring data in that way. For those of you who are more, who feel better in the SQL Server Management Studio space, right? We can get to that, and you can switch to the SQL Analytics endpoint, and that'll take just a second here. And then what we're going to see come up is it'll have a little bit more of that look and feel, right? So I have my server, I have my database. Here's my tables, right? I can look at I can look at a view I might have had created. I can do a select top 10, top 100, top whatever off of it. I can create a new view. I can alter this view, right? So you can get that more, if you're more comfortable in that Management Studio T-SQL type experience, you could do that easily just by switching back and forth from the Lakehouse to the SQL Analytics endpoint and be able to look at it that way. And it does save all of your queries down here. So I was actually playing with this view a little bit ago. So if I want to run it, I just have to highlight my select and then run my query, and I get my and my results come up here, so I can see what that looks like. And now I can save this query if I want, and and run it later. I can add it as part of one of my pipelines or my ETL process if I'm going to do any of that changing. So you have a lot of variability in how you can interact with. That's one of the nice things about Fabric. So we have this high level of variability in how we want to interact with our data, and we're not locked into you can only work with it this one way, right? We have multiple different ways, and depending on what our clients are more comfortable with. And even if you're somebody who's like, what, I would just rather be in Management Studio. Well, you can come out here and you can get the actual SQL connection string. So that allows you to go out to Management Studio. If my mouse will cooperate.
Chris, I'm very glad that you are showing that, because that was going to be my question. As a good old TSQ, that's where I got into programming, was beyond ADA.
Yep.
I started getting into TSQL, and I will tell you, Management Studio is my home, like for a lot of SQL and data people, right? So it's good to see that they have that endpoint.
Yep, and you have that endpoint, and you can connect to it. And again, here's all those tables that I had in there. Here's that view I had in there. I can create new views in here, new schemas working off of it. So you can work at it through here. In fact, Justin and I had a client that we were working with just a couple weeks ago, where the client was more comfortable in Management Studio, and he asked that, and I was like, yeah, here's a connection string, do it. And the customer was like, that's great. Like they've gotten so much more out of it than they had thought they were going to, just because now they could work in Management Studio where they felt more comfortable. So Microsoft makes it very easy. If you're more comfortable in using a notebook and using PySpark or going out of that way, you can do your ETL and everything that way, or you can come in here. We can do it through Management Studio if you want to. So they really make it possible for you to work in the flow that you feel most comfortable with. That's one of the things that I really like about it, is that it lets you be in control of how you want to work through it.
So the underlying stuff, like we've seen here, like you were kind of showing, like when Justin went to it, he showed, for example, the Synapse Link workspace, right? There are some things that you don't access the same way, right? Or is there actually like a Synapse Link workspace that you go to per se, or do you use more of that in the bottom there, that data? Okay.
Yep, there would be a Synapse workspace. So this is a Synapse one that I have. Notice when I highlight it there, instead of having the option here to unlink Fabric or view in Microsoft Fabric here, I have the option to go out to the Azure Data Lake, go to the Azure Synapse Analytics workspace. So yeah, you can get to the different places through through there. It's just that Maker Portal is where you would go to then say, hey, these are the tables that I want to make active in either of these different locations. So yes, you can get to them directly from here, or you can go out to your portal.azure.com and if you know what the storage account name is, or what the Azure Synapse workspace name is, you can go to them directly through there. So again, it's Microsoft. There's 1,001 ways to do every little thing that you want to do.
Right.
So
that's scale. So yeah. That's what we do with scale, right? Because we have to have different components for different customers, which makes total sense. So that's awesome. Okay. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
And to point out that we can connect our Synapse Analytics workspace to SQL Management Studio as well.
Yep. Good point.
Yes.
Thanks, Justin.
Yep. Through there as well. So when we're talking about Fabric, so again, this is just the same thing that Justin showed a little earlier, just with the Fabric in the lower right instead of that. So we have what it looks like with export to Data Lake, and now we have down here what it looks like for our Fabric. So our Dataverse then connects directly to Fabric, and through Fabric in that one lake. With a Fabric in that one lake, then we can connect other different, whether it's, we want to bring in Snowflake, whether you want to do a shortcut to AWS, Google Cloud, any of that other stuff, we can bring it in.
That makes sense. I mean, like you are kind of showing on here, architecturally, like there's a lot of other components that were kind of displayed obviously in the Synapse link, right? So yeah, people, it's the chat we've got internally, like, we're over time, right? So, but yeah, kind of to everyone's point here, as we can see with Fabric Link, it's very, like I said, it's more of that platform as a service concept, right? Chris, is what they're trying to get to with it, which to me makes a lot of sense to what even Esteban said about it doesn't mean you have to be a bigger customer to use that. You might be a smaller customer and get some real big benefits off of it, right? Justin, yep.
Yep. And I will skip ahead here to the you were talking about the capacity pricing
Yeah.
slide, and you asked the question you had asked about that is that the pay as you go versus the 40% if you do the reservation. And what we've kind of been telling what our kind of recommendation, what I told you the other day, with clients, has kind of been, hey, Microsoft does make it very easy to go up or down, and they're always willing to take more money, right? So they kind of make it easy to be able to go back and forth from that. But so you can see like an F32. That's about $4,000 per month pay as you go, or if you do the 1 year reservation, that's down to $2,500. Well, what we've been telling clients is that, hey, let's, while we're trying to figure out what capacity you actually need, and we do have some tools from Microsoft to kind of help us estimate where we should start you, and then what we say is like, hey, play around with it at the, yeah, it's going to cost a little more for the first couple of months, but if we play around with it at that level, once we get you in the right capacity, whether it's an F16, 32, or 64, or whatever, once we get you into that right capacity, that's when we say, okay, now let's go with the reservation, because the reservation, you're going for a full, I think you can go from 1 to 3 years on the reservation. So yes, you do save time, but then once you're in that reservation, it is a little bit harder to go up or down based on that, just because you've reserved now that F32 for the next for the next year. It's not that it can't be done. It's just that, with the reservation credits and everything, it just, that's when we would, at that point, my brain hurts. And so we just throw you over to the Ridwan and our licensing team, because they can do that a lot better than I can. But
yeah, licensing is its
yeah,
own science when it comes to Microsoft,
yeah,
trust me. And just to
yeah.
kind of double down on even that statement to a degree with it, as an example, a lot of people are like, well, Chris, why can't you tell me exactly what the price is going to be? And it's, I don't think people understand sometimes that the way that they've designed reports impacts potentially that cost. Because if you, for example, in the export to data lake, if you total up a column where it has to read all that data in the CSV file, that's going to be a lot of reads, right? And with the Parquet format, that could be a lot less, but we're not going to know until we've examined every single report. So it makes more sense, like you said, to look at that pay-as-you-go model, make sure it's performant, make sure that the queries are working as expected, and then look at the optimization after you've started to see some of those metrics come back. So that way, you know what to size with, right, inside of the
Yep.
environment. Is that kind of where you're going down the path of, Chris?
Yeah, because in Fabric, you're paying what's called capacity units. Capacity units are used for everything from running the report to transferring of the data and to doing all that. Yes, you're still paying for you still pay for the storage that you use, but the capacity units, the capacity that you're at, kind of determines how much of that you can run. Now, those of you who are like, oh, okay, well, what happens if, I'm right sized, I'm at an F32 and I'm going along stable, but all of a sudden I choose a job and that job is going to drastically go over. Well, Microsoft has this concept of what we call smoothing and bursting, right? So if you're going to all of a sudden use a ton of capacity, or for some reason everybody in the company is looking at the same report at the exact same time from Fabric, and it's going to use those CUs, it will actually finish the job. It will actually finish the job for you. So it'll burst and let you do that job and let you get through it, and then it'll smooth that out. It'll smooth that usage out over an hour or longer, depending on what it was that, depending on the item that was that you went over on. So then it'll smooth that out over, and so you won't get charged. You're not going to get charged extra or anything like that, because it's going to smooth that then out over that longer time frame on there. Now, if you're Now, if that's happening all the time and everything, eventually your capacity is you're gonna start getting notes from Microsoft saying, hey, you're continually pinging above where you should be, and the smoothing isn't taking care of it where it smooths it out, and you're still under your line. You might want to look at upping your capacity. So they will, nicely and gently tell you that maybe you need to up your subscription there. But yeah,
Great.
if you have a 5-minute thing where it goes over top of it, you're not going to be it's not like you're going to get charged a ton extra because you had that one little extra usage.
Right, and that's the one I'm getting at, right? Because we've seen that in the past for customers like, yay, we're going to use it. Yay, we exceeded capacity. Yay, we just got a huge bill that we weren't expecting. So that's
Right.
a really good thing because I think, the cloud consumption model, I get it, right? That's why we're in the cloud consumption model. It's based off of consumption, but, empowering a customer to be able to make the choice as to what capacity they want to have for that billing, I think it's just a really smart move in my mind, Chris. So that's good to hear. Awesome. Well, I know, gentlemen, we're at time, a couple minutes over, so I want to just say thank you to everyone that's been able to kind of hop on and provide some of the comments in the background. Rob had mentioned, for example, the One Lake is OneDrive, which is awesome, Chris, because we now have a good view of that, right? And then, yeah, it looks like another comment. Tell us how much the query is going to cost before it happens, right, Rob? You nailed it too. So I guess with that team, Chris, Esteban, Justin, any parting words that you want the audience to have before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, we went through a lot today, but I think, that's the reason why it's important to get partners involved because, we're the experts in the area. We do this day in and day out for a lot of different customers, and so, we can really help customers who are trying to do this on their own and bring that value to them. So, again, just reach out if you're considering Synapse Link or Fabric Link, or if you're one of the customers using that export to Data Lake. Don't wait any longer. Let's have that conversation.
Agreed. Chris,
Agreed.
Justin, anything for you, gentlemen?
No, I think that sums it up very well.
Yep.
Awesome. Awesome.
All
All
right,
right.
thanks for having us, Scott.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure. Thank you, everyone that joined Confab. Like I said, 2 weeks from now, we'll be going through some additional content that we'll have posted on the site. So be on the lookout for that. But thank you again, Chris, Esteban, and Justin, for giving your expertise to the audience. I'm sure hopefully people are going to start reaching out and asking more about it. And obviously, here, we would love to be able to help you on your journey, and especially on any data journey. We're talking about export to data lake, but candidly, any type of data project, we've got a team that can help you with that. So whether it's Dynamics, remember we're more focused on the Microsoft tool set. So if you've got Microsoft tooling, reach out to us. We'll give you a straight answer as to whether or not we can or cannot do it, and hopefully help you win, which is really our mission statement. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining. Have a great one, everyone, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.